The courtroom in Montgomery, Alabama, hummed with tension on a sweltering July afternoon in 2025. The air conditioning rattled feebly against the oppressive heat, doing little to ease the weight of the moment. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the press of onlookers, reporters, family members, and curious locals, all craning their necks toward the front of the room. At the center of it all stood Judge Evelyn Carver, a woman whose name carried the heft of 30 years on the bench. At 64, her silver-streaked hair framed a face etched with resolve, her dark eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Known for her unyielding adherence to the law, she was a figure both admired and feared, her rulings as immovable as the granite pillars outside the courthouse. Before her stood Marcus Ellison, a 26-year-old black man with a lean frame and a quiet dignity that belied his circumstances. His hands, cuffed in front of him, were steady, but his heart thumped against his ribcage. Marcus wore a borrowed suit, slightly too large, its sleeves brushing his knuckles. He'd been arrested 9 months earlier, accused of orchestrating a deadly arson attack on a warehouse that killed 2 night shift workers. The prosecution claimed it was revenge. Marcus had been fired from the warehouse job weeks before the fire. The evidence was a tangle of circumstantial threads, a gas can found in his garage, a witness who swore they'd seen him near the scene, and a grainy security video showing a figure in a hoodie fleeing into the night. Marcus had pleaded not guilty from the start. "I wasn't there," he'd said, his voice firm during the trial. "I'd never hurt anyone." He'd been at home that night, he insisted, repairing an old radio with his younger brother, Jamal. But the alibi faltered. Jamal, only 16, stumbled under cross-examination, and no one else could corroborate the story. The jury, after a grueling 3-day deliberation, returned a unanimous verdict, guilty. Now, as Judge Carver adjusted her glasses and peered down at Marcus, the room fell silent. Her voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through the stillness. "Mr. Ellison, you have been convicted of arson in the first degree and 2 counts of felony murder. This court has heard the evidence, your presence at the scene, your motive, your opportunity. These crimes have torn apart families and shaken this community to its foundation." She paused, her gaze locking onto Marcus's. He met her eyes, unflinching, though a bead of sweat traced down his temple. "I sentence you to 60 years in the Alabama State Penitentiary, without the possibility of parole," she declared. The gavel slammed down, a thunderclap that reverberated through the room. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Marcus's mother, Grace, seated in the second row, clutched her Bible and let out a choked sob. Jamal, beside her, stared blankly at the floor, his hands balled into fists. Reporters scribbled furiously, already framing the headline, "Young man sentenced to life behind bars in warehouse fire case." Marcus didn't react. He stood like a statue as the bailiff approached, his mind a whirl of disbelief and resignation. 60 years. He'd be 86 when, if, he walked free. His dreams of opening a repair shop, of marrying his high school sweetheart, Lena, of building a life beyond the cramped apartment he'd grown up in, all gone in the echo of that gavel. As he was led away, he cast a final glance at his family. Grace mouthed, "I love you," her face streaked with tears. Jamal looked up, his eyes blazing with a fury Marcus hadn't seen before. Judge Carver gathered her papers and retreated to her chambers, the weight of the day settling into her bones. She poured a glass of water from a pitcher on her desk, her hands steady despite the faint tremor of exhaustion. She'd presided over countless cases, sent dozens of men and women to prison, but something about Marcus Ellison lingered, a flicker of doubt she couldn't name. His composure, his unwavering claim of innocence, gnawed at her. She dismissed it as fatigue. The evidence had been clear, the jury unanimous. Justice, as she understood it, had prevailed. Outside, the Montgomery sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city. The warehouse fire case had gripped the public's attention for months, a tragedy wrapped in outrage. The victims, 2 fathers, one with a newborn daughter, had become symbols of loss, their faces plastered across newspapers and TV screens. Marcus, in turn, had been painted as a monster, a man driven by spite to destroy lives. The narrative was tidy, the sentence severe. But beneath the surface, unseen by the judge, the jury, or the grieving families, a thread of truth lay buried, waiting to unravel everything. That night, as Marcus sat in a holding cell awaiting transfer, he traced the cracks in the concrete wall with his fingertip. He thought of his mother's prayers, Jamal's anger, Lena's tearful letters. He thought of the fire he hadn't set, the lives he hadn't taken. "I'll prove it," he whispered to himself, a vow as much to the universe as to his own soul. "Somehow, I'll prove it." Meanwhile, in a small office across town, a young journalist named Aisha Patel sifted through a stack of tips emailed to her desk at the Montgomery Herald. Most were noise, conspiracy theories, petty complaints, but one caught her eye. An anonymous message, sent just hours after the sentencing: "The warehouse fire wasn't what it seems. Check the foreman's records. Ellison's innocent." Aisha frowned, tapping her pen against her lip. She'd covered the trial, seen the evidence, felt the public's fury. But something about the tip tugged at her curiosity. She saved the email and made a note to dig deeper. She had no idea the journey she was about to begin, or the lives it would change. A month passed, and Marcus adjusted to the gray monotony of prison life. The Alabama State Penitentiary was a sprawling fortress of concrete and steel, its corridors echoing with shouts and clanging doors. He kept his head down, avoiding trouble, but the weight of his sentence pressed harder each day. Letters from Lena arrived weekly, filled with hope he struggled to mirror. Jamal wrote too, his words sharp with frustration: "They're wrong, Marcus. I'll find a way to fix this." Grace visited when she could, her faith unshaken, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. Judge Carver, meanwhile, returned to her routine. She presided over drug cases, domestic disputes, and petty thefts, her gavel falling with the same precision. Yet Marcus's face lingered in her mind, an uninvited guest. She'd catch herself replaying his trial, his steady voice, the prosecution's airtight case, and wonder if she'd missed something. One evening, sipping tea in her oak-paneled study, she pulled the case file from her shelf. She skimmed the witness statements, the forensic reports, the timeline. Everything aligned. So why did it feel off? Across town, Aisha Patel chased the anonymous tip like a bloodhound. The warehouse foreman, Darren Holt, had been a minor figure in the trial, a gruff man who'd testified briefly about Marcus's firing. Aisha requested his employment records from the warehouse company, expecting resistance. To her surprise, they arrived within days, a thick packet of schedules, payroll logs, and incident reports. She spread them across her cluttered desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating the pages. Hours later, she froze. A single line in an overlooked report jumped out: Holt reported a break-in at the warehouse 2 days before the fire. No police follow-up. A break-in? The trial had never mentioned it. Aisha cross-checked the dates. The fire occurred on April 12, 2025, the break-in, April 10. She dug deeper, pulling police records from that week. The break-in report existed, filed by Holt himself, but it had been dismissed as vandalism, no investigation pursued. Suspicion prickled her skin. Why hadn't this surfaced? She tracked down Holt's address, a trailer park on the city's edge, and drove there the next morning. Holt was a wiry man in his 50s, his face weathered by sun and cigarettes. He eyed Aisha warily through the screen door. "What do you want?" he growled. "I'm with the Herald," she said, holding up her press badge. "I'm looking into the warehouse fire." "Your break-in report, why didn't it come up at trial?" Holt's expression darkened. "Ain't my job to play detective. I told the cops what I saw, someone jimmying the lock. They didn't care." He hesitated, then added, "Look, I don't know nothing about that fire. Leave me alone." Aisha pressed him, sensing his unease. Did you see who broke in? Anything that could point to someone else? Holt shifted, glancing over his shoulder. I saw a guy, tall, white, wearing a cap. Didn't get a good look. Cop said it was probably kids. That's all I got. He slammed the door shut. Aisha jotted the description in her notebook, her pulse quickening. It didn't match Marcus, 5'9", black, no cap in the security footage. She needed more. She filed a public records request for the warehouse's security logs and called a contact at the police department, an old college friend named Trey. I need a favor, she told him. Anything on that break-in, or why it was buried. Trey delivered a week later, meeting her at a diner with a manila envelope. You're poking a hornet's nest, he warned, sliding it across the table. Inside were internal memos from the precinct. One, dated April 11th, flagged the break-in as low priority by Detective Paul Grayson, the same officer who'd led Marcus's arson investigation. Another memo, scrawled in Grayson's handwriting, read, Holt's story unreliable. No action needed. Aisha's stomach twisted. This wasn't oversight. It was deliberate. She took her findings to her editor, a grizzled veteran named Carl. This could blow up, he said, scanning the documents. But you need hard proof, something tying Grayson to the fire itself. Aisha nodded. I'll get it. Back in prison, Marcus found an unexpected ally. An older inmate, Clarence "Pops" Jackson, took him under his wing. Pops, serving life for a crime he swore he didn't commit, had a knack for reading people. You got that look, he told Marcus one day in the yard. Like you're still fighting. I am, Marcus said. I didn't do this. Pops nodded. Then keep your head up. Truth's got a way of finding daylight. That night, Marcus wrote to Aisha, an address he'd gotten from Lena, who'd seen her byline. Ms. Patel, I don't know if you'll read this, but I'm innocent. If you're digging, look at the warehouse locks. Something wasn't right. He mailed it, a shot in the dark. When Aisha received it days later, she stared at the words. The locks. She hadn't considered them. She pulled the arson report again. The fire's origin, a gas-soaked rag near the loading dock. No forced entry noted. But if there'd been a break-in, could the locks have been tampered with? She called a locksmith friend, Mia, and asked her to analyze the report's photos. Mia's verdict came fast, those locks were cut clean, professional job. Not some kid with a crowbar. Aisha's theory solidified. Someone had planned this, someone with access, skill, and a reason to frame Marcus. She just needed to prove who. Aisha's investigation gained momentum, but the stakes rose with it. Late one night, her apartment buzzer sounded. She opened the door to find a note slipped underneath, "Stop digging, or you'll burn too." Her hands shook as she read it, but she didn't back down. She installed a security camera and kept going. Her breakthrough came when Trey unearthed a deleted police file, a witness statement from a homeless man, Eddie, who'd slept near the warehouse the night of the fire. Eddie had seen a white man in a cap dousing the dock with gas, not Marcus. Grayson had interviewed him, then marked the statement uncredible and buried it. Aisha tracked Eddie down under a bridge, his memory hazy but consistent. I told that cop, he rasped. He didn't want to hear it. Meanwhile, Judge Carver's unease grew. She requested the arson case's full evidence log, telling herself it was routine oversight. When it arrived, she noticed gaps, missing witness interviews, unlogged security tapes. She called the DA, a longtime colleague named Richard Wells. Why wasn't this flagged, she demanded. Wells shrugged it off. Sloppy work, Evelyn. It happens. But it didn't sit right. She contacted Aisha after seeing her articles questioning the trial. I'm not saying I was wrong, Carver told her over coffee, her tone guarded. But if there's more, I need to know. Aisha shared everything, the break-in, the locks, Eddie's statement. Carver's face hardened. Grayson, she muttered. She'd clashed with the detective before, his arrogance, his shortcuts. She ordered an internal review, quietly, and subpoenaed his case files. In prison, Marcus clung to hope. Pops taught him to channel his anger into purpose, helping him draft appeals. When Aisha visited, slipping through as a friend, she whispered, "We're close." Marcus gripped the table, tears in his eyes. "Thank you." The truth erupted when Aisha got the warehouse's unedited security footage from a whistleblower at the company. It showed Grayson, not Marcus, near the dock hours before the fire, planting the gas can later found in Marcus's garage. Aisha took it to Carl, who greenlit the story. The Herald's headline screamed, "Cop framed innocent man in deadly arson." The fallout was immediate. Grayson was suspended, protests erupted, and Carver reopened Marcus's case. She watched the footage in her chambers, her hands trembling with rage. She'd sentenced an innocent man, and trusted a liar. The hearing was chaos. Crowds packed the courthouse, chanting Marcus's name. Grayson, in cuffs, glared from the witness stand as evidence piled against him. The footage, Eddie's testimony, falsified reports, all laid bare. He'd staged the fire to cover embezzlement from the warehouse, framing Marcus to tie up loose ends. Carver vacated Marcus's conviction, her voice steady but heavy. "Mr. Ellison, this court failed you. You're free." Marcus exhaled, decades of weight lifting. Grace and Jamal rushed to him, sobbing. Lena waited outside, her smile brighter than the sun. Grayson was charged with arson, murder, and corruption. The system shuddered, reforms were demanded, investigations launched. Carver retired soon after, haunted but resolute. She visited Marcus, offering an apology he accepted with grace. "You fixed it," he said. "That's enough." Aisha won a Pulitzer, but her real reward was Marcus's letter, "You gave me my life back." He opened his repair shop, married Lena, and mentored kids like Jamal, proving innocence could triumph. The twist? What Carver learned wasn't just Marcus's innocence, it was her own capacity to change everything.